crystal chandeliers bathed the grand hotel ballroom in warm golden light, reflecting off polished marble floors and towering Christmas trees draped in red ribbons and silver ornaments. Soft carols floated through the air as waiters moved gracefully with trays of champagne, and laughter rose in glittering waves from well-dressed guests celebrating success, deals, and holiday cheer. Yet at the edge of the room stood Emily Carter, 8 months pregnant, her hands folded protectively over her belly. Her pale blue gown was elegant but modest, chosen carefully to hide the swelling she knew embarrassed her husband. She smiled when spoken to, but the smile never reached her eyes. Ryan Carter moved among the crowd with practiced charm, his tailored suit immaculate, his attention fixed anywhere but on his wife. He laughed too loudly, clinked glasses, and subtly stepped away whenever Emily drew near. To him, her pregnancy was an inconvenience, a flaw in the perfect image he wanted to present to investors and colleagues. Whispers followed Emily wherever she went, curious glances at her belly, pity in some eyes, judgment in others. She felt like a decoration that no longer matched the room. As the orchestra softened, Ryan climbed the small stage to give a holiday toast. His voice was smooth, confident, every inch the rising corporate star. Mid-speech, he beckoned Emily forward. Confused but hopeful, she approached, thinking perhaps this was an apology, a moment of warmth. Instead, Ryan pressed a thin envelope into her hands, his smile tight and rehearsed. "It's for you," he murmured, not meeting her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into something cruel and unmistakable: divorce papers. The room kept spinning. Music swelled again, glasses clinked, people laughed, unaware that her life had just cracked in half. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Inside her, the baby kicked hard, sudden and frantic, as if sensing her terror. Surrounded by celebration, Emily stood breaking, alone in a room full of joy. She tasted salt and metal as she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to scream. No one stopped the party. No one noticed her silent collapse. In that glittering ballroom, under wreaths and lights, Emily realized Christmas would never feel the same again, and whatever she was about to lose would change her forever. Fate had already turned cruel. Ryan's hand closed firmly around Emily's wrist as soon as the music grew louder, his fingers digging into her skin beneath the soft fabric of her sleeve. He leaned in close, his smile fixed for the watching crowd while his voice dropped to a sharp whisper meant only for her. He told her not to embarrass him further, not to make a scene, not to cry like a weak woman in front of people who mattered. He said her pregnancy had already damaged his reputation enough, that investors were uncomfortable, that whispers followed him because of her. Each word struck harder than the last. Emily shook her head, tears blurring the glittering lights above. She pleaded softly, asking him to wait just a few days, to let Christmas pass, to give her time to breathe. Her voice cracked as she reminded him of the years they had shared, the home they built, the child growing inside her. Ryan's expression didn't soften. Instead, his jaw tightened, irritation flashing in his eyes. He accused her of being selfish, of clinging to a marriage that was already dead. He said signing now would be cleaner, quieter, better for everyone involved, especially him. Around them, conversations faded into uneasy murmurs. Guests pretended to sip champagne while stealing glances, pretending not to notice the humiliation unfolding inches away. Emily felt every stare like a burn on her skin. Ryan guided her toward a long table decorated with poinsettias, gold ribbons, and crystal candles meant for holiday desserts. He laid the papers flat, slid a pen toward her, and crossed his arms, waiting. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the pen. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of her entire life. Tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink as she tried to read through blurred vision. Laughter erupted nearby, someone telling a joke, someone else applauding, the party continuing as though nothing cruel was happening at its heart. Emily's baby kicked again, strong and insistent, and she pressed a hand to her belly, whispering an apology under her breath. Ryan tapped the table impatiently. Finally, with a sob she couldn't hold back, Emily signed her name. The scratch of the pen echoed loudly in her ears, final and unforgiving. With each letter, she felt something inside her break away, piece by piece. When she finished, she slid the papers back toward him, her shoulders collapsing as though the strength had drained from her body. She didn't notice the man standing across the room, tall and composed, his dark eyes fixed on the scene with quiet intensity. Alexander Hale had arrived unnoticed, spoken little, observed much. As he watched the pregnant woman sign away her marriage under Christmas lights, something deep in his chest tightened. In that moment, destiny shifted, though Emily remained painfully unaware. Alexander Hale stood slightly apart from the crowd, a crystal glass untouched in his hand, the noise of the party fading into a distant hum. He had attended out of obligation, not celebration, preferring observation to performance. From the moment the woman at the decorated table broke down, his attention had fixed on her, drawn by something he could not immediately name. As he watched her shoulders tremble and her hand shield her swollen belly, a familiar ache stirred in his chest. He had seen that look before, years ago, in his own reflection after betrayal had carved its mark into his life. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, even as tears streaked her face. She did not scream or collapse theatrically. She stood, endured, protected. Each time her husband spoke sharply, she instinctively turned inward, one palm cradling her unborn child, as though shielding the baby from words that cut too deeply. Alexander noticed the way her chin lifted after she signed, the silent dignity of someone humiliated in public yet refusing to beg for mercy. That composure stirred something dangerous inside him. Ryan took the papers and barely spared her another glance before turning away. A woman in a glittering red dress slipped easily into his arm, her manicured hand resting possessively on his chest. Laughter followed them as they disappeared into the crowd, leaving the pregnant woman standing alone under the lights. Alexander's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. He knew that walk away well, the cowardice disguised as confidence. Without breaking his gaze, Alexander murmured to his assistant, asking who the woman was. The assistant hesitated, uncomfortable, flipping through mental notes before answering dismissively that she was nobody important, just the wife of a mid-level executive, someone insignificant to the evening's purpose. Alexander finally looked away then, slowly, his eyes cold with certainty. He corrected him quietly, saying that pain like that did not belong to nobodies. He said some lives only look small because the world hadn't noticed them yet. As he watched Emily gather herself and step away from the table, Alexander felt a pull he couldn't explain, a sense that something irreversible had just begun. He had learned long ago that fate rarely announced itself loudly. Sometimes it whispered through crowded rooms, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when two broken paths were meant to cross. The party ended without meaning for Emily. She barely remembered leaving the ballroom, only the blur of lights fading behind her and the cold bite of night air slapping her face. Ryan didn't offer his arm or a word of comfort as they arrived at the house they once shared. Instead, he unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned back with a look that felt final. He told her she couldn't stay. He said the house was his now, that the lawyers would handle the rest, and that she needed to leave immediately. His voice was flat, efficient, as if discussing office logistics instead of dismantling a life. Emily stood frozen on the doorstep, her breath fogging in the freezing air. She asked where she was supposed to go, her voice barely audible. Ryan didn't answer. The door closed softly but firmly, the sound echoing louder than any shout. A moment later, laughter drifted from inside, the sound of glasses clinking, the sound of her being erased. Snow began to fall harder, thick white flakes settling on her hair and shoulders. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her swollen body, her fingers numb as she stumbled down the steps. Each breath felt shallow, the world tilting slightly as dizziness crept in. She tried calling someone, anyone, but her hands shook too badly. The screen flickered once, then went black. Her phone died in her palm, taking her last fragile connection with it. She walked until her legs gave out, collapsing onto a cold metal bench beneath a flickering street lamp. Tears streamed freely now, freezing against her cheeks. She bent forward, wrapping both arms around her belly, whispering apologies between sobs. She told her baby she was sorry for failing, sorry for bringing them into a world that felt so cruel, sorry for not being strong enough. The baby shifted weakly, and fear tightened her chest. The street was quiet, muffled by falling snow, the city distant and uncaring. Emily's vision blurred, the cold seeping deep into her bones. Just as darkness threatened to pull her under, headlights cut through the snowfall across the street. A long black luxury car rolled to a smooth stop, its engine purring softly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the rear door opened slowly, spilling warm light onto the snow, and a tall figure stepped out, moving toward her as the night held its breath. The man who stepped toward her moved with calm purpose, his polished shoes crunching softly against the snow. Alexander didn't ask who she was or why she was there. He didn't demand explanations or offer pity. He simply knelt in front of her, his presence steady, and gently asked if she could stand. Emily tried, but her legs trembled violently beneath her. Embarrassment burned through her tears as she shook her head, whispering that she was fine, that she didn't need help. Alexander slipped off his coat without hesitation and draped it carefully around her shoulders, wrapping her in unexpected warmth. The fabric smelled faintly of clean linen and something reassuring. He noticed how cold her hands were, how her lips trembled as she tried to hold herself together. He told her she needed to see a doctor, that the cold and stress weren't safe for her or the baby. Emily resisted weakly, her pride rising through the fear. She said she didn't want trouble, didn't want charity, didn't want to be a burden to a stranger. Alexander's voice softened. He told her she owed him nothing, not gratitude, not explanations, not even trust. He said this wasn't charity, it was humanity. Something in the way he spoke, quiet and certain, broke through her defenses. With his help, she stood, leaning heavily against him as he guided her into the car. The warmth inside wrapped around her instantly, and the contrast made her chest ache. As the door closed and the world outside went silent, Emily finally shattered. Sobs tore from her throat as she covered her face, apologizing over and over without knowing why. She admitted she had nowhere to go, no family close by, no plan for the night. The words spilled out between gasps, years of fear and loneliness surfacing all at once. Alexander listened without interruption, his expression unreadable but his attention absolute. He leaned forward and quietly instructed the driver to take them to a private medical center immediately. No arguments. No delays. As the car pulled away into the snowy night, Emily clutched the coat tighter around herself, unaware that this moment of kindness was about to change everything she believed about loss, fate, and survival. The hospital room was washed in soft white light, broken only by the steady rhythm of monitors and the distant hum of late-night activity. Doctors moved quickly but calmly, their expressions serious as they examined Emily and reviewed the readings. One of them finally explained that the extreme emotional stress and exposure to the cold had triggered early labor. Emily's heart raced with fear as she listened, her hands gripping the sheets while contractions tightened low in her body. She nodded numbly, tears sliding into her hair as they assured her they would do everything to stop it. Outside the room, Alexander remained seated in a quiet corridor, his jacket folded neatly beside him. He hadn't left once. Hours passed unnoticed as nurses came and went, offering polite nods but no questions. He stared at the floor, replaying the image of Emily collapsing in the snow, the sound of her sobs echoing in his mind. He felt an unfamiliar tension in his chest, something dangerously close to helplessness. When the door opened briefly and a nurse told him she was stable for now, relief washed through him more intensely than he expected. Later, when the room finally fell quiet, Alexander was allowed inside. Emily lay propped against pillows, pale and exhausted, her face streaked with dried tears. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. She thanked him softly, her voice barely more than a breath. He told her she was safe here, that she didn't need to worry about anything tonight. The words unlocked something in her. Her fingers tightened in the blanket as her eyes filled again. She said there was something he needed to know, something she had never told anyone. Her voice shook as she confessed that Ryan was not the biological father of the baby. She explained how she had hidden the truth, believing silence would protect her marriage, believing love meant sacrifice. She said she had been afraid of losing everything if the truth came out, so she carried it alone. Alexander felt the room tilt. The steady beeping of the monitor grew unbearably loud. Dates flashed through his mind with frightening clarity. A winter charity event years ago. A woman with tired eyes and a soft laugh. One night of vulnerability he had buried under years of work and regret. He stared at Emily now, truly seeing her for the first time, and the resemblance to a memory he had never allowed himself to examine became impossible to ignore. His hands curled slowly into fists as realization settled like ice in his veins. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. The truth loomed between them, terrifying in its weight. Alexander said nothing, afraid that speaking would shatter the fragile calm keeping her stable. He only nodded, masking the storm inside him, knowing that his past had just collided with his present in the most irreversible way possible. The days that followed passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Everything was handled with discretion, just as Alexander insisted. A private physician came and went without attention, and a confidential DNA test was arranged under layers of silence and security. Emily barely slept during the wait. Her thoughts spiraled between fear, disbelief, and guilt, every possible outcome feeling too heavy to carry. She watched snow melt outside the hospital window, each drop echoing the slow countdown in her chest. When the results finally arrived, Alexander was the one who opened them. He stood near the window, the city lights reflecting faintly in the glass, his expression unreadable as his eyes moved across the page. Time seemed to freeze. Emily searched his face for any hint of what was coming, her hands clenched tightly together. When he looked up, there was no doubt left to hide. The unborn child was his. The memory came back to him with ruthless clarity. A charity gala years ago, a quiet balcony, two strangers sharing grief and honesty for one fragile night. A misunderstanding the following morning. Missed calls. A belief that she had chosen to disappear. He had buried the regret beneath ambition and silence, never knowing what that single night had created. Seeing Emily now, fragile and brave all at once, made the past crash violently into the present. Emily's breath caught as the truth settled. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of destiny revealing itself so suddenly. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered that she never intended for this, that she had convinced herself the past was gone, that protecting her marriage had seemed like the only choice. The room felt too small for the enormity of what they had uncovered. Alexander crossed the space between them and stopped, careful not to crowd her. His voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. He told her he wasn't there to claim or control her life. He said he wouldn't take anything from her, not her freedom, not her choices. But he would not walk away. He promised protection, support, and honesty, not ownership or demands. This child was his responsibility, and so was the woman carrying them, if she would allow it. For the first time since Christmas night, Emily felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the fear. Not relief. Not love. But the fragile beginning of safety. The corporate gala was alive with chatter, the hum of glasses clinking and heels clicking across marble floors. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the sharply dressed executives and socialites gathered to celebrate the year's successes. Ryan stood confidently near the center of the room, sipping champagne and laughing loudly, basking in the attention of colleagues and media alike. He spoke of his clean break, the freedom he had gained, and how he was moving forward unburdened. Cameras flashed, capturing every smug smile, every boastful gesture. To him, the world was still on his side. Alexander entered quietly, unnoticed at first, but his presence drew eyes the moment he approached the center. The tall, composed figure moved with deliberate calm, his dark suit impeccable, his gaze sweeping over the room with an intensity that silenced whispers. When the cameras trained on him, he didn't flinch. Instead, he allowed the attention to focus, knowing exactly what needed to be said. He stepped to the microphone with authority, his voice carrying through the ballroom, clear and commanding. He spoke first of fairness, integrity, and the courage required to stand by those who had been wronged. Then, calmly, he exposed Ryan's cruelty, the public humiliation, the callous abandonment, and the disregard for the well-being of a pregnant woman. Every word hit with precision, his tone factual but not vindictive. He made it clear that Emily's choices and dignity remained untouched, emphasizing her strength and resilience without shaming or exploiting her vulnerability. Finally, he revealed the truth that would shake the room. He was connected to the unborn child, and he would ensure the baby's safety and care, protecting Emily every step of the way. The room went silent. Flashbulbs popped, capturing Ryan's rigid posture, the forced smiles fading into shock. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Colleagues whispered urgently, and social media feeds buzzed instantly. By the end of the evening, Ryan's reputation had crumbled. Overnight, he became the subject of gossip, speculation, and condemnation. Invitations were rescinded, partnerships reconsidered, and the image he had so carefully curated shattered under the weight of his actions being exposed to the world. Meanwhile, Emily, watching from the safety of Alexander's side, finally felt a sense of justice begin to settle over her, fragile but undeniable, as she realized the balance had finally shifted. Emily's new home was quiet, nestled on the edge of a tree-lined street where snow drifted softly in winter and birds chirped in spring. It was not a mansion with crystal chandeliers or gold-plated fixtures, but it offered warmth, safety, and the kind of privacy she had not known in months. The walls were painted in soft creams, sunlight spilling through large windows, and every corner felt like a small refuge from the chaos of the world. She unpacked slowly, arranging simple furniture in tiny touches for the baby, feeling a fragile sense of calm settle over her. Alexander visited, but never intrusively. He respected her space, never lingering beyond what she allowed. He asked permission before speaking, before touching, before making any decisions that concerned her or the baby. At first, Emily struggled to accept this gentleness, and used to being treated with patience rather than control. She began to notice small things, how he listened without judgment, how he remembered little details she mentioned, how he never made her feel guilty for past choices. Trust, long buried under betrayal and humiliation, started to seep back in, piece by piece. Their bond grew quietly. They shared late-night conversations over mugs of warm tea, talking about fears, hopes, and the future. Alexander helped with preparations for the baby, offering guidance and support while never overstepping. Emily began to laugh again, small and tentative at first, as moments of normalcy returned to her days. Each shared silence, each comforting word, each gentle gesture, made her feel noticed and valued for the first time in a long while. By the time the nursery was ready and the baby's clothes neatly folded, Emily realized she no longer felt invisible. She felt seen. Not as a fragile woman crushed by betrayal, not as a vessel carrying someone else's child, but as Emily, strong, resilient, and deserving of care. For the first time since that Christmas night, hope threaded through her life, fragile yet undeniable, promising that perhaps her story was only beginning. The first light of Christmas morning filtered gently through the hospital blinds, casting soft patterns on the walls of the delivery room. Outside, snow fell quietly, blanketing the city in a peaceful white hush that seemed almost magical. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the sheets, exhaustion and anticipation mingling in her chest. After hours of labor, every contraction and every tear had led to this moment. A cry pierced the air, sharp and clear, and Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief and awe. Her baby boy was finally here, healthy and strong. Alexander stepped closer, his expression a mixture of wonder, pride, and disbelief. He gently took the baby in his arms, careful and tender, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the flood of emotion. Tears slid down his cheeks as he looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the faint flutter of the baby's fingers wrapping instinctively around his own. For the first time, the weight of responsibility felt beautiful instead of heavy. The room, still and calm except for the soft cries, seemed to hold its breath alongside them. Emily leaned back in her hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, watching Alexander cradle their son with a quiet reverence. She studied the small movements, the delicate fingers, the soft exhalations, and realized something profound. Destiny had not abandoned her that night at the Christmas party. It had redirected her path in a way she could never have imagined. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loneliness, they had all led her to this moment, to a man who respected her, and to a child who was the living embodiment of hope and new beginnings. Outside, snowflakes danced lazily against the window, catching the morning light like tiny diamonds. Emily reached out, touching her baby's tiny hand and then Alexander's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle before her. Her heart, once broken and weary, felt whole. For the first time in months, she believed in love, in family, and in the quiet magic of destiny that finds you even when the world seems cruel. Ryan stared at his reflection in the darkened glass of his apartment window, the city lights a blur around him. Everything he had built, his image, his career, his carefully curated reputation, was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. Within days of Alexander's public revelation, his board had voted him out, investors pulled support, and the media painted him as the callous, heartless husband who humiliated a pregnant woman for vanity. Every headline was a dagger, every article a reminder of the arrogance that had once defined him. Even his mistress, the woman who had once clung to his arm as if she were untouchable, left without a word. The charm and allure he had wielded so effortlessly were meaningless now. He tried to call her, to plead, to explain, but the phone rang unanswered. Messages went unread. It was as if the world itself had turned its back, leaving him isolated in the wreckage of his own choices. Desperation drove him to one final act. He sought Emily, hoping perhaps a show of remorse could restore something, anything. He arrived quietly, his usual confidence stripped away, and muttered apologies, stammering as the words tumbled out awkwardly. Emily looked at him without a flicker of recognition or regret. She did not respond. Her eyes, calm and resolute, reflected a woman who had endured pain, humiliation, and betrayal, and had risen above it. She had moved forward. Her life no longer revolved around Ryan's actions or the consequences of his cruelty. Alexander stood nearby, steady and protective, a silent reminder that her world had changed. Ryan left, empty-handed, the weight of his mistakes pressing down heavier than any punishment the law could impose. Meanwhile, Emily prepared for the future, her child in her arms, her heart cautiously open, and her spirit stronger than ever. The past had closed behind her, and the only direction she could move was forward, toward hope, safety, and the life she deserved. Karma had spoken, and the balance had been restored. 1 year later, the scent of pine and cinnamon filled a cozy, warmly lit home. Twinkling fairy lights draped across the walls, reflecting off carefully arranged ornaments and the soft glow of candles. It was a far cry from the opulent, cold ballrooms of the previous Christmas, yet it held a warmth and intimacy that no luxury could ever match. Guests were few but cherished, close friends, family, and those who genuinely mattered. Laughter filled the room, soft and genuine, carrying with it the ease of comfort and familiarity. Emily stood near the center of it all, her posture tall, her movements graceful and assured. Her once timid and cautious gaze now held confidence and quiet pride. Gone was the woman crushed by betrayal and humiliation, in her place was someone who had endured pain, survived heartbreak, and emerged stronger. She smiled easily, interacting with her guests, her laughter carrying a note of authenticity that drew people in naturally. Her baby, now almost 1 year old, crawled happily on a soft rug nearby, giggling at the toys Alexander had thoughtfully chosen. Alexander stood beside her, not in the manner of a protector or savior, but as a true partner. He spoke softly, laughed easily, and watched her with an attentiveness that never felt overbearing. They moved together through the room, not as a couple defined by tragedy, but as two people who had chosen each other deliberately and without pretense. Their bond was evident in every glance, every shared smile, every gentle touch as they guided their child around the room. As Emily held her baby and looked around the room, a quiet realization settled in her chest: the darkest betrayals, the deepest pains, and the loneliest nights had all been part of a path leading here. Destiny had not abandoned her, it had redirected her, guiding her to a life filled with love, respect, and the kind of family she had always dreamed of. She glanced at Alexander, who met her gaze with the same understanding and shared history, and knew without words that they had arrived exactly where they were meant to be. That Christmas, Emily understood fully that sometimes the cruelest twists of fate are simply the universe's way of steering you toward the life you were always meant to live.